Hi guys, this is Shan. Normally I'm behind the camera, but today I'll be presenting a new series where we get people to come along to present what they're interested in, if they want to talk about something, or just generally anything in architecture that they like. So today we have Bhaveeka. He's a fourth year student in the Masters of Architecture, and he's a good friend of mine. And he's very interested in what?
My main architectural interest is looking around nature and architecture's role in nature and the way we view it. Looking at how nature can be incorporated into architecture and how that affects our everyday life.
So today he'll be telling us about Geoffrey Bawa and a couple of his works. We'll see from there.
Geoffrey Bawa was born in Sri Lanka in 1919. He was born into kind of like an aristocratic family. The wealthier side of Sri Lankan society, like his dad was a military advisor or aide to the governor of Sri Lanka, because at the time Sri Lanka was a colony under British rule. He actually goes off to study law first at Cambridge.
Wow.
Yeah, so in 1938 he heads off to London, goes to Cambridge to be a lawyer, comes back, kind of realizes he doesn't really like law. he drives around like a Rolls Royce, but like he doesn't like the lawyer lifestyle.
Wait, what year is this? 19?
This is like the 1940s. He's kind of
With the Rolls Royce?
yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
He was balling then.
Yeah, he was.
Wow.
During this time, he's a lawyer. His brother manages to convince him to buy a property called Lunuganga near Benthitter, which is this kind of beach resort. And at Lunuganga, he begins to kind of fall in love with architecture more. During his time in London, he loved to travel. So he went to Italy, he went to America, and he kind of realizes that he needs some qualifications. So he goes back to London and he enrolls at the AA as a third-year student.
Wow.
And so he does his final year in Italy because he loves Italy so much, but he's kind of running out of funds. So he heads back to Sri Lanka. And in Sri Lanka, that's when he starts to kind of build his architecture practice. The first project I think I'll talk about is his Sri Lankan Parliament. So the Sri Lankan Parliament was from, cut this out, 1979 to 1982. So this is the Sri Lankan Parliament. So it's essentially an island in the middle of a lake.
I was gonna say, it looks weirdly Chinese.
That's the interesting thing. So it's got this north-south axis. It's got this massive boulevard that leads to this 6 pavilions. The central pavilion being kind of the main chamber, where inside there's this beautiful wooden-clad tent-like parliament. I've been very lucky enough to actually visit it, and it is probably the most beautiful parliament I've ever been in. And around it are basically 5 satellite pavilions, and those kind of just serve as like security functions and dining services and all the rest of it. This was used to be a marsh. They actually flooded the lake. They actually created this man-made lake, which might at first seem really drastic, which it kind of is, but it actually kind of evokes something in Sri Lankan history where we actually have a lot of man-made tanks in Sri Lanka. Back in...
Like war tanks?
No, like water tanks.
Oh, water tanks.
Water tanks. So the whole idea of changing water in order to irrigate land is actually something that's really connected back to our old history. So water was really important just in terms of feeding the population, irrigating the land. So I think in that way, that's why water was important, was just as a type of functional use for storing such a valuable resource and also basically feeding the population. And the site he chose is itself kind of interesting because it draws back to this time where there used to be an old kingdom that used to sit where the parliament sat, which was the last time Sri Lanka was unified, was at this place where this contemporary parliament is built now. So it's interesting that you say that the roofs are kind of Chinese, right? Or
definitely more Chinese, because the very first reference that I think of is obviously the Forbidden City.
Yeah.
Because they have a very similar sort of layout and composition, you know, the larger structures towards the backmost center.
Yeah.
And there's smaller pavilions that are littering your path towards that final.
Yeah. This whole parliament was built around the concept of the garden city. He kind of planned for this to be kind of this amazing public space, you know, in between these pavilions, there would be kind of outdoor courtyard spaces. You could perhaps have press areas, you know. The great tragedy that happened is that this whole area, there was a civil war in Sri Lanka. So this whole area, even to this day, is completely shut off. There's security barbed wire everywhere. And he kind of envisioned there would be this great public gathering around, you know, these parliament buildings, and the whole area around it would be kind of inspired by the nature and the garden and the water, but that never happened, essentially. The war kind of interrupted all that. In this book, you can kind of see how nature is really incorporated into a parliament building. Nothing I've ever really seen before. Normally with other parliament buildings, you kind of have this like grey concrete, it's all around it. But in this one, you have this modernity to it. Because it's got green roofs, it's got trees next to it. There's this real sense that if this was a public space, like it was meant to be, it could have been something really cool. Geoffrey Bawa was really interested in natural ventilation and natural ways of heating and cooling a space. He was never really into ACs, I don't think, you know? Like, even now in Sri Lanka and around the world, essentially, it's very much of like, we got to close off the doors, we got to moderate the temperature inside. Whereas Geoffrey Bawa is much more like, let's incorporate nature, let's open all these windows, let's open up the screens. And that's obviously because of climate change and the way things are going right now. Sometimes they've failed. Sometimes the ventilation hasn't really worked out. But the plus side is create a really nice space.
Just off that picture alone, with what the giant pond in the middle, the deck space with the retreated interior, it kind of gives it more sense of porosity, you know? And like as opposed to the parliament buildings we're used to, the concrete and the grey, and the modern parliaments are very essentially fortresses, right? They take cues from the Bowart's classicism, you know, as popularized by Daniel Burnham, the idea of that Rome, and these are these strong, tall structures, and that's the idea of power. And so the parliament buildings take that and they want to show off their power.
So this is actually the time when Sri Lanka gets changed from Ceylon to Sri Lanka. And so this is kind of, and also this troubling aspect of kind of nationalism as well coming in. And so there's this real need to build a Sri Lankan parliament, and that doesn't draw upon those classical motifs that are for every kind of parliament that has, you know, a strong facade, you know. And while this definitely has some issues around master planning, an architect drawing a massive pencil and being like, this is a pond, this is the boulevard, a permeability, like you were saying, a porosity, a real sense that it's welcoming and it's not as harmful as you think. Because I think it would have been cool if this was an open kind of public space. In summary, the Sri Lankan Parliament embodies a lot of things that are kind of in between history and time and space. It's both the ancient Sri Lankan architecture, but also relates to medieval Sri Lankan architecture, and also to kind of modern architecture. Le Corbusier and Japanese modernism. He draws on a lot of influences that are not just Sri Lankan. But he creates something very, very unique. The thing I'm going to be getting across is kind of the potential for his architecture, for Bawa's architecture, to be timeless. So the next project is going to be, when we talk about, is 33rd Lane in Colombo, Sri Lanka, 1960 to 1998. He gets this property before he does the Sri Lankan Parliament, but he kind of keeps on modifying it. Throughout this entire time.
So the completion date.
That's the interesting thing about Bawa, is that his own projects, his own properties, he just keeps on working on it. You know, it's never completed. This is his house in Colombo, and as you can see, it's really narrow plot of land he's got going on.
It's long.
It's long. It's not like New Zealand where we have kind of boundaries and recession plains and all that. It's just very much like build to the wall, extend up, and do what you want inside, you know, like whatever's inside, that's your kingdom. So that house is kind of in this super congested part of Sri Lanka where all the houses are like 3 stories tall. But at the time in the 1960s, it actually wasn't like that. We were a much poorer country back then. He actually had like a lot of space to work with. But now if you visit it, which you can, it's super caught up in a lot of other buildings. You probably couldn't even see it. If you look at the plan, there's a real permeability between the outdoor and indoor space. I'll just read this little passage. The final result is an introspective labyrinth of rooms and garden courts that together create the illusion of endless space on what is, in reality, a tiny suburban plot. Words like inside and outside lose all meaning here. Here are rooms without rooms and roofs without walls, all connected by a complex matrix of axes and internal vistas. I've visited it. It's very hard to photograph in its completeness because each room is kind of like its own little world. And if you can see in the plan, every room is connected to this courtyard little space. There's a real sense that these trees are kind of breaking the bounds. There's an amazing indoor-outdoorness, you know? There is no kind of backyard. The backyard is in and amongst all of it.
The in-yard.
Yeah, exactly. And at the very top of this building, he kind of has almost like a periscope type thing on the 3rd floor. And you used to be able to see a lot of Colombo, but now it's The book refers to Villa Savoy, but I think it kind of refers more to our general sense of always wanting a good view. You know, of always wanting a little watchtower in order to look over our property. I remember going to the third floor and you kind of get this amazing view of the spine of the building. All these kind of trees kind of popping out from it. It's like almost, I don't know if you've done this, but you walk around in like old European cities or old Chinese cities, you know, and you kind of turn the corner. It's like, wow, a beautiful vista. You turn the next corner.
Yeah, the unfolding sight, the promenade, you know, the wanderer.
That's what it's like walking through this house.
Really?
It's hard to get the sense of looking at pictures what this building is like. There are lots and lots of little places to sit and reflect, and there's this real sense of timelessness, you know? He kind of draws on this kind of Italian, you know, idea of little courtyard houses, but that's not really Italian, right? That's kind of, you know, even Morocco, you'll probably find some of it. And kind of the clean white surface perhaps evokes modernism, but it's not really modern. No. These are like actual archaeological.
Yeah, I was gonna say, at first I thought they were built in, but then I realized that there's no base.
During this time, there's a lot of resurgence around Sri Lankan archaeology. Yeah. Because Sri Lanka has beautiful ancient architecture that was kind of just lost, you know, during the colonial period. These columns kind of reference that ancient Sri Lankan architecture. It wouldn't be surprising if this was actually an archaeological kind of ancient column that he managed to get.
This bar was like mine.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was really very little restrictions back then. There's a long history of people kind of reusing and adapting ruins into their own homes.
I like how in the spaces between the walkways, you have little arches and this little sitting area is very, very, again, reminiscent of Japanese architecture, and the little purlin ornaments that kind of remind me of like the tatami mats.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, the segmented floors.
Right.
Yeah, like a unitized system of measuring space in a way.
And that's the beautiful thing about his architecture, is that everybody will kind of draw what they want from it.
That is true,
You know? And it's also highly unusual because in Sri Lanka, you normally want to keep nature out because that's mosquitoes and flies and, you know, rain is pouring in, but he's almost inviting that, let the house age, you know, let nature come in, have that natural ventilation. I mean, I think like the book says, indoor outdoor flow loses all meaning in this house because everything is outdoor and everything is indoor. Even if you're outside in the courtyard, you're still inside the house. Sri Lanka during this time was, especially in the 70s, it was kind of crazy. There was lots of restrictions placed on materials. You know, nowadays we can kind of pick 7 different types of concrete and 7 different types of stone and have, 8 different types of stains. But there they just kind of had to work with what is. And so what almost makes it better is that limited material palette is able to direct the architecture materiality in a much stronger way. It doesn't kind of lose itself in little moments. Not many people in Sri Lanka are doing this at the time. And so his house kind of a very timeless piece of architecture that has this amazing, like we keep saying, permeability, timelessness, lots of spaces to relax and enjoy life. Yeah. If you get the chance to go to Sri Lanka, then it's an advertisement.
This is an
ad for Sri Lanka.
This is a bad time to be going to Sri Lanka or anywhere.
The last project I'll be talking about is Lunuganga. So this project was from, from 1948 to 1998. So this was his first property he bought. I think his family had a lot of properties, but this is the one that he kind of fell in love with and got him into architecture in the first place. And it is very hard to describe this project.
It's huge, dude.
It is huge. It is almost like an estate levels of land.
Yeah.
So he worked this project from 1948 to 1998, which kind of goes to show as you've been saying.
Jesus, wait, 1948 to 1998.
I know.
That's 50 years.
Yeah, that's 50 years. 50 years. That he's
hell.
constantly tweaking it. He's constantly
I like that.
Adding to it.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, if you get to go there, it's a pretty rural part. $15 entry, as of now. Just more ads.
Yeah.
It's not a mansion. It could easily well be a mansion. Swimming pool out back, infinity pool, 4 bedrooms and type of thing. But it's actually a very kind of modest home. Yeah.
Okay.
And this is kind of where he died. So he died in 2003. He spent a lot of his final years here. So I think in terms of for Bawa, this was a very special place for him, because otherwise he wouldn't have stayed here if it wasn't that important. there is no real facade. The building kind of just occurs to you. It's lots of trees around. A lot of architects have kind of come across like to just demolish the front of their building, right? And you know, there's nothing in front. You want that building facade to be clear. But Bawa's he doesn't care. He just puts trees in front of there because he knows that if you're inside that space, trees are beautiful. He appreciates what nature does. And he doesn't care too much about the facade of things.
It's hidden away.
It's hidden away. It's definitely hidden away. There's an island on the other side of the river, and he managed to buy it.
Jeez, there's money. Jeez.
Yeah.
He's gonna buy an island.
Well, he was a very successful architect.
That's true.
And he came from a wealthy family.
Oh, that helps.
Yeah. And that's a valid thing to think about, is that a lot of the time he's criticized for, you know, he's only able to make houses for the wealthy, he's only able to design hotels for the wealthy. He didn't do any type of mass housing thing. But Geoffrey Bawa himself commented that he did not feel up to the challenge of building low-cost housing, which is a fair enough thing. I think low-cost housing is a really hard thing to do. I think if you've seen any kind of social housing scheme that's gone awry, you kind of wonder, those architects perhaps should have heeded the same advice, you know, like perhaps they shouldn't have got involved in low-cost social housing. It's also important to know that a lot of his buildings were civic, you know. A lot of hotels in Sri Lanka kind of serve a civic purpose as well as kind of gathering places and function spaces. So while he does serve the wealthier side of Sri Lanka, his architecture is still wonderful, I think. And there's still things that can be drawn into it that we can do in our normal life. Down towards the east, you kind of have this river that comes by down the hill, kind of a very sudden kind of cliff almost face. And there he's got gardens, like a Renaissance garden, because he loved Italy so much. In fact, there's a lot of statues there.
Yeah.
Where he's actually brought them back from Italy. He's kind of put them in there. But there is a real informality to it, because basically in garden architecture, you kind of have the two extremes of, you have like Versailles, extremely planned, linear, axial, and you have the picturesque, you know, kind of random assortments of trees and stuff. So this falls in the middle of both of this. It's both an Italian estate, a Renaissance garden, but also Sri Lankan space. So at Lunuganga, he's really experimenting with views and that idea of framing a view and exploring space, you know. There's multiple ways you can sit in his garden, and as you can see in the plans, normally what architects do is we like to just draw a tree is just a dot with a circle around it. He kind of pushed the idea that every leaf should be drawn, every pebble should be drawn. And that really emphasizes the fact that that space outdoor, that tree outdoor, is really important to planning, you know?
It's really nice.
There's real beauty in detail.
Yeah.
And that beauty in the natural materials.
What are these the waves of the garden?
So that's the river.
That's the river.
That's the river.
That is so nice.
Yeah.
Normally in plan, like water is just blue or nothing. There's just nothing.
Yeah. I was very lucky enough to actually go there and visit. It's very peaceful. An interesting kind of side point is that he had a lot of knowledge around trees. And so he purposely plant trees and put wire around them and shape the trees to grow the way he wants to. It's a very balanced view of making a building. He has this wonderful estate. He could do a lot with it, but he builds something very modest for himself. And I think that speaks something to Sri Lankan architecture about being modest, being humble with materiality, recognition of Sri Lankan history, colonial history, but also recognizing that we're in modern times and we've got to be modern about things. So in all of Geoffrey Bawa's works, especially at Lunuganga, there's this real peacefulness with nature, this kind of permeability as we were talking about in the Sri Lankan Parliament. There's this sense of nature coming in and respecting it, and ventilation and air, and this connectedness between the indoor environment and the outdoor environment to such an extent that there is no separation between the two. And he just loves to create peaceful spaces in order to relax and to view things and reflect on life. And I think he has a perfectly timeless way of building. Yeah, so that is Geoffrey Bawa. Thoughts on Geoffrey Bawa? Or I guess I've shown you a very select few buildings, and it's hard for you to read into it.
That is true. I do like the Sri Lankan Parliament one. It's very reminiscent of Chinese city planning.
The Forbidden City.
The Forbidden City in particular.
Yeah. You can kind of draw a lot from it.
Yeah.
You know, it's it's hard to categorize, which is what I love about Geoffrey Bawa. You know, and I think all architects love to think of themselves as like, we can't be categorized. But I think Geoffrey Bawa especially is working in the in-between space because Sri Lanka itself is an in-between country. That's why he's a Sri Lankan architect, because first and foremost, because Sri Lanka itself is in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It was the center of trade. It was, a lot of things were happening. The Portuguese came, the Dutch came, the British came, and now Sri Lanka's there. And it's a real mixing of places. And I think Geoffrey Bawa acknowledges that. And even in his own office, he had a lot of people from around the world he worked with. It's a very diverse architecture he creates.
It also reminds me a lot of what Louis Barragan.
Yes.
Kind of going through the same story, you know, Mexico and its identity has been lost, you know, throughout all the wars. Mexico kind of loses itself, and Louis Barragan introduces this idea of Mexico's new identity, takes the same kind of cues as well, combining not really regionalism, but just taking the vernacular and modernizing it.
Definitely. I think both Barragan and Bawa have this timeless quality to it, in which you can't say that's Mexican. It speaks more to who we are as people in general. You know, anybody who goes and visits Geoffrey Bawa's buildings will kind of love it, because it's not, even though he is a Sri Lankan architect, it is not just for Sri Lankans, it's for anybody. That's kind of the beauty of it, you know? It's this real universality to it. Yeah.
That's nice. I guess with that house plan, like at first glance, it just looks like a box. But then you realize that the backyard is inside.
Yes, yeah.
Then it's like, wait a second, like you're just gonna turn the corner, you know, you finish washing your hands, washing your dishes, and then there's a tree in your house.
Yeah, exactly. Every room is connected to the outside.
Yeah.
You know, there is no backyard, as I was saying. It's multiple outdoor connected spaces that it's really beautiful. There's something to be said around that kind of manipulation of space. And how do you even create such a beautiful building in such a narrow plot of land?
Lunuganga?
Lunuganga. Yeah, fair.
I really can see that it's a continuation of what he did in his house.
Yeah.
The building is, I still feel like in his house, in that block, as much as you can say that the outside was in, the nature was still very contained.
Yes, definitely.
But in Lunuganga, the nature is a bit more free. It's a sprawling kind of nature.
Yeah.
It's not the nature ends at this corner. The nature comes from the outside and crawls in.
Exactly.
It's that next step to the idea that he wanted to carry across in his house. It's really nice.
I think that's why I think he preferred Lunuganga. I think that's why he preferred to live in Lunuganga. And he himself was a very kind of interior man. And I think Lunuganga was a way for him to retreat from that. I always think of Geoffrey Bawa when I think of designing space, because it's such a timeless way of doing things, but it also respects nature. And I think now there's this whole push towards sustainability and towards climate change and towards rethinking how architecture meets nature. But he was way ahead of the curve. He was integrating nature, doing green roofs, having courtyard spaces long before any of this discussion around sustainability was happening. And so he was kind of before his time, essentially. You know, I think if he came about now, he'd be the perfect sustainable architect.
Wow.
Yeah, because he's using natural materials as well.
Yeah. I guess sort of to wrap this up, what's the main thing that you take from it, and are there any parts of it that you try and put into your own work?
I think the main thing to take away from Bawa, you don't have to design something crazy for it to be architecture. You don't have to have angled walls and a curving glass thing that, you know, it doesn't have to be monstrous. Architecture can be, there's beauty in the normal. There's beauty in the everyday. There's beauty in the fact of just having a comfortable chair, looking out at a nice view with a beautiful wooden frame around it. And that's peaceful. You know, you really don't have to do much more than that. And I think Geoffrey Bawa's architecture emphasizes that simplicity. You don't have to live in a mansion to have a beautiful sense of architecture and a sense of space, you know. Just your backyard veranda or your seat or your bedroom, that's architecture. And that can be just as beautiful as some $1 million project. When I visit his buildings, I'm much more at peace with myself. I kind of begin to reflect more. I'm much more connected with nature. And I kind of wonder, how come we don't have more of this? Not so much focus on style and kind of form, but on space and on feeling. I think that's a major takeaway, is that sense of focus on who you are, and it's that sense of what space are you creating and what's the feelings that will be created from that space, rather than axial plans, forms, and glass, and all the other stuff. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Bhaveeka. That was really fun.
Thanks a lot for having me. Hopefully, somebody listens to this Bawa ramble.
Cheers, dude. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys learned something and research a bit more, not just listen to some guy on the internet. I hope you guys gain something from it and come to appreciate the everyday, like Bawa says, a little bit more. Catch you guys next time.
Be more, less chill. This is all being recorded there.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so
Don't swear.
don't say swears.
Hey, guys, this is Good Space here. Like and subscribe.
No.
That should be cut. That should.
Wow, very nice.
So, okay,
Oh, let's give that.
Just go run this over. Oh shit! What a New Zealand bloke.
Do you want me to plug your Instagram?
No.
Okay.
There's nothing Bawa on that.
Okay, so that was
Is that sorted?
That's sorted.
That's sorted. Oh my god. I thought I'd be trapped in this interview forever.
What?
A constant 12-minute loop. Okay, how do I stop this? How do I must, oh my god, my lips are so dry.